here we come. It's moving into the end of the appointment. And for some of you, or a lot of you, or maybe none of you, I'm not really sure, you're thinking, okay, this is it. This is the video. This is the one where I learned how to overcome all of her objections. Okay, you've been with me for long enough now to hopefully realize that this is not the meat of the video. What happens in the last 10, 15, 20 minutes of your appointment? Not the meat. You have been working on closing this bride ever since this bride set an appointment up with you. You have been doing it online. You have been doing it over the phone. You've been doing it through email. You've been doing it through text. You've been doing it through Snapchat. And then as soon as she walked in the door, that consultant that's working with her immediately started working on it. You have been working on closing the sale so much before this moment where she's standing in her favorite dress. And you've learned things. You learned things in pre-sale that mom's not with her. And you learned in the beginning of the appointment that friend thinks that it's too early for her to decide on finding a dress. And you learned that there is this weird dynamic between mom and bride that is going to be a struggle here. You learned all of those things so long ago. And yeah, I am really hoping that you started working on dealing with those things. But I also want to tell you that because you dealt with those things, because you were her problem solver, because you have offered solutions way back when, you offered solutions in the pre-sale call, you offered solutions at the beginning of the appointment. The troublemaker that you identified, your closer, that person that comes around and is helping all of the bridal appointments, has been working on that person to encourage them in how exciting it's going to be that she's going to find her dress and we're going to check it off the list and you're all here to experience it together. You've been working on those things. So instead of focusing on what objections you have to overcome, because guys, it's a conversation. Whenever you think about objections, it's a conversation, and it started so long ago. I want to walk you through what I believe are the 6 steps to a successful close. Number 1, add a veil and add the jewels, add the jewelry. Save this for the end. If you right now in your appointment process are doing veils throughout the appointment, I really recommend that you stop. I really recommend that you save the veil for the end. Why? Because there is just something. There is something magical about a veil. There is something that happens whenever a bride puts on a veil. Now, not every bride wears a veil, and we're actually seeing it trend that way, right? We're seeing that less and less brides are wearing veils. But just like I've talked about before, that brides do things because they're influenced, right? Especially this generation of brides. If you have never put your bride in a veil, you are doing your bride a disservice. There is something about a veil that turns a girl from a girl in a pretty dress into a bride. It doesn't happen for everybody. Remember, all of these things are true. It is not going to happen for 100% of your brides. You will never close 100% of your brides. And I don't say that to discourage you, but to encourage you. That whenever you do all of these steps and all of these processes and you have a bride that simply doesn't respond to it, it's going to happen. But if we do these things, if we do all of these processes, I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent. If we do all of these things, it's going to work for the majority of brides. So that's why we develop systems and processes like this. Not because they're going to work for everybody, but because they're going to work for most. And that's what we care about. So whenever you have that outlier, whenever you have that bride that simply doesn't respond to something in your process, it doesn't mean your process is broken. It doesn't mean you are broken. It just means that it doesn't work for her. So that's my tangent. Put your bride in a veil. I'm real passionate about this, and you want to know why? Because I was this bride. I thought veils were weird. I thought I hated them. The only reason I was going to wear a veil is because my mom insisted on it. And so I looked at my consultant that I was working with and I said, I think veils are weird and I don't want a veil. So I don't even care. Just go grab me like the smallest, like nothing on it, whatever veil that you have. And that's the one that I'm going to get with this dress. And I didn't care about it and whatever. And I had a really hard time. I was that bride that had a really hard time deciding between two dresses. Okay, fast forward 5 years, 4 years, and I started working in the bridal industry, and I learned for the very first time in my life what a cathedral veil was, and I saw it, and I put it on a bride for the very first time in my life, and I went, that's so pretty. If my consultant would have put me in one of those, I totally know that I would have gotten it. And I also totally know that this veil would have looked horrible with the second dress that I just couldn't decide between. And so I would have been like, yeah, that's my dress. Okay, I was that bride. For some reason, we stand in appointments and we go, have you thought about a veil? What do you think, like long or short or cathedral or fingertip? They don't know what those mean. Just put a veil on the bride. And I do recommend you always start with a cathedral. And I tell my brides, tell them, okay, I'm going to put a veil on you. And you know what? You can say no to it. But I would so much rather you say no to this veil or no to a veil or no to this is too long than for you to go later and always wonder, what would I have thought if I would have tried that on? Always put a veil on your bride. So that's step number 1. Dress her up. Put a veil on her. Put some jewelry on her if it's appropriate. Dress her up to look like a bride. If you've got some flowers in your store, hey, I've got some sitting right over here. We've got like 5 different bouquets in our store. Maybe hand it to her. Maybe not. It's up to you. Have her take a walk in the gown. Again, you got to figure out your store layout and how this works, but I really do recommend having your bride take a walk in the gown. There is something that feels a little bit different about that too, right? She's standing there. She's been standing on this pedestal. She's been standing on this pedestal in all of the dresses. So have her do something different in this one. Have her take a walk in it. And then while she's taking that walk, paint her a picture. Paint her a picture of what her first look is going to look like, or what it's going to be like as she walks down the aisle at the venue that she told you about, or how this dress is going to look on the beach, or with the wind blowing, or outside in that winery, or in the cathedral church with the super long, aisleway, or whatever it may be, or that moment out in the woods whenever they're taking pictures and he's going to see her for the first time. Paint her a picture of that moment, especially as she's walking, especially as she's moving in this gown. Oh my goodness, this is going to be so amazing in your church with your family all sitting there, and those doors are going to open. And like you said, this is just, it's kind of unlike anything that maybe any of them would have expected you to get. And the shock and awe that's going to be on their faces and those understated details, like this is such a wow dress. And that moment that they're going to see you and then you're going to walk down the aisle, whatever it may be, whichever portion of the story that's going to evoke the most emotion out of them, paint them the picture of that moment. And then ask her what emotion she's experiencing right now. How are you feeling about all of this? How are you feeling about this moment? Ask her, what emotions are you experiencing right now? Take some time. Take some time to ask her that question and let her process. Let her process that. By now, surely you've learned whether she's an internal or an external processor. So if it's quiet, let it be quiet. Let her process that story that you just told and that question that you just asked. and let her answer your question. And then ask her crew, ask the people that are with her, ask them that exact same question. How are you guys feeling about all of this? How do you guys feel about this dress? How do you guys feel about, like, what emotions are you guys experiencing right now? Hopefully by now, if you have done all of this, if you have painted that picture, someone's crying. You know, someone in the group right now is crying, and it's your job to kind of capitalize on that, right? Lean into that emotion. This purchase is an emotional purchase. And we know it. We know it's an emotional purchase. And we know that there are some brides that are super analytical. I am not an emotional person. I am not typically. I make my decisions more on the thinking rather than the feeling. And so I can go a little pros and cons here. But there is still some level of emotion in this, and we are still affected, we especially get affected if we have invited the people with her into this process, because even if your bride is a thinker, if she's not necessarily a feeler, there is somebody in that crew that is a feeler. Chances are there's more than one of them, and you've got them hooked, and they're experiencing emotions. And then that thinking bride sees that feeler friend or that feeler mom or that feeler sister experiencing emotions, and she goes, oh, her thinking self goes, oh, this dress does that for them. They did respond in that way. And that makes sense in my thinking mind that that's a positive thing. That's one more thing to go in my pros checklist, because it made some people experience that kind of emotion. So it's time. It's time to ask for the sale. It's time to ask that bride if she is ready to say yes to this dress. It's time, for the first time, it's time to ask a closed-ended question. It's time to ask her that yes or no question, because you've walked her through these 5 steps and you're moving into step 6, which is asking for the sale. And you have to remember, you have had a conversation with this bride for such a long time, from whenever she first set her appointment. So don't be afraid of this moment. And don't be afraid if she says, I'm just not ready yet. And don't be afraid in the steps before, whenever you asked how she felt, if she said she was overwhelmed. This process is a process, and you can circle back through it, and you can use all of the tools that you've had, and just remember, encourage. So when that bride says, I'm just not ready yet, encourage her. Tell her, I understand. I know this process is kind of overwhelming. How can I help you? How can I serve you? How can I help you through this process? What is holding you back? Those are really the questions you have to ask. You don't have to get so technical. You don't have to get technical. You don't have to have a checklist of, if she says this objection, then you ask this. And if she says this objection, you ask this. How can I help you? How can I best serve you? How can I help you through this process? And what is holding you back? Because all I want to do is make this as easy as possible for you. That is the truth. That is the crux of what you're trying to do for this bride. Those are the questions that you should be asking when an objection comes up at this point in the process. Because earlier in the process, you dealt with objections individually. Now, you just want to know how you can best help and serve your bride. So, ultimately, we want to walk through these 1 through 6. And we want to realize it's simply a conversation, and it's not a scary thing. And I'm going to ask for the sale, because why wouldn't I ask for the sale? We have walked through this entire process. We knew from the beginning that we were coming to this point. That was the whole goal. So why would I not ask for the sale? It would be weird if I didn't. So I'm going to ask for the sale. And obviously, she's going to say yes, right? She's going to say yes. And there you go. There you have it. Like I said, I want you to know this. I want you to know that I don't have an expectation that you're going to sell 100% of your brides. I know full and well that there are times where objections cannot be overcome, that there is something you simply can't overcome, that you need to get her back in and you need to follow up with her. I also know that sometimes you don't have the dress for the bride, or sometimes she already fell in love with the dress somewhere else, and that store simply did not help her get to this process, did not help her get to this point of being okay with saying yes right then. I know all of those things. Unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand that can make you sell 100% of your brides, and that's okay. That's okay. Remember, we have talked about the industry average is 40%. My goal for you is that you're selling more than 40%. I mean, granted, my goal in my store is a minimum of, it's a minimum of 50% to get your commission. Your goal, your personal goal, the store goals are 65%, but we're striving for 75%. Okay? Like, there's a reality to this, but I want you to develop a process. I want you to take all of these steps. I want you to take these 6 steps of the actual close and to develop this as a process, to make it come naturally, not because you're going to close 100% of your brides, but because you are going to feel more confident. You are going to just love your brides. You're going to love your job. Your staff are going to know what to do. You're going to have a consistent experience for every single bride that comes in, and that's going to make a huge difference. It's going to make a huge difference for you, for your store, for your brides, and it's going to help you close more sales. And the goal is to increase your closing ratio, not necessarily to get to 100%. And you're going to do an awesome job, and it's going to be great, and this is going to help you through that process of getting every single bride, or as many brides as possible, to this moment where they're ready to say yes to their dress.